Right, no winner has been declared yet in the U.S. election, and millions of votes are still to be counted, and that may take several days in Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Both candidates are still in the race. Even though U.S. President Donald Trump has claimed victory, it's nail-biting stuff for Democrats because former U.S. Deputy U.S. President Joe Biden certainly doesn't have the comfortable lead that many polls suggested he would have. Now, as the counting continues, the focus has been on the contested states. And remember, it's not the popular vote that counts. Each state is assigned a number of electors. And even if the race is close in a particular state, the winner takes all the electoral college votes. Earlier today, Trump won Florida with its 29 electoral college votes, dealing a blow to Biden, as more often than not in previous polls, whoever takes Florida has won. Well, let's bring you the latest on the U.S. elections now with a panel discussion starting in Florida, where we're joined by correspondent Sarah Walton, and we're also joined by Sherwin Bryce-Peace in New York. Coming to you shortly, Sherwin, but Sarah, let's start with you. A Trump win declared in Florida. How emphatic was that?
Well, what Donald Trump managed to do in Florida was flip the predictions being given by the polls. We started the final day of voting here in the US election with Joe Biden having a slight lead in the opinion polls, the predictions here. He was up by about 3 or 4 points, although that is still kind of within the margin of error. And we had a lot of early voting. About 63% of registered voters in Florida had already sent in a mail ballot or used the early voting days, and it was the registered Democrats that had a lead there. But it was always predicted that the number of registered Republicans on the actual final polling day would be quite high, that they would prefer to come on that, the traditional election day and cast their ballots in person. And that is really what appears to have happened. And the moment they called the election for in Florida for Donald Trump, which was about 5 hours after the polls closed in Florida, that was a really, really key moment. Everybody at that point across the United States had really been looking at Florida, waiting for the result, because had Joe Biden won here, it would have been game over, really. It would have been the White House for the Democrats for the next 4 years. It would have left Donald Trump with really very little path to find that magic number of 270 electoral college votes that he needs to win the White House again. Now that we had a result in Florida for Donald Trump, we have this situation that we're currently in, which is that everybody here in Florida, across the United States, is watching the remaining swing states where the count is so close, because that is now where this election is going to be decided.
I mean, Sarah, this is going to be analysed for a very long time, how this happened. Has that already started? We've often heard about the shy Trump voters. So you said Biden didn't have a huge lead, but he was leading in the polls before reality hit.
You're right, the analysis has already started, and two key demographic groups in Florida that people look at, and that is older voters, because there's a large number of retirees moved to Florida. Now, it was predicted that they were particularly concerned about how Donald Trump had handled the coronavirus pandemic. Being older, they are particularly vulnerable to the virus. They are normally a sort of a key Republican voting bloc, but pollsters were saying that they believed some of those older voters would split and move towards Joe Biden. That does not appear to have materialized, or certainly not in large enough numbers to make any difference. But the key thing that seems to have happened in Florida is amongst Latino voters. And for this, you need to look at one area in particular, which is Miami-Dade County, an area with a large number of Latino voters, particularly Cuban voters, people who've come to the United States to move away from the socialist regime in Cuba. Now, that area broke very heavily for Hillary Clinton in 2016. She won that by 30 points. But what we've seen from the turnout this election, Joe Biden leading there by just 7 points, and that was enough to make the difference. Donald Trump really focused on those Latino voters. He did everything in his rallies and with TV ads there to paint Joe Biden as a socialist candidate. And while he didn't win the Latino vote in that Miami area, he did just enough to flip the result in Florida and keep his chances of winning the White House open.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah Walton, on the ground for us in Florida. And we'll let you go now, Sarah. Thank you for that update. This was a very important state, as we said in other elections. Often the winner takes Florida and then goes on to take the polling. Maybe it won't happen this time. Let's move to New York. Sherwin, so Florida is lost, but the race is not lost. Just tell us where things stand right now.
Yeah, a lot of Democrats would have had a sense of deja vu from 2016 in terms of how the evening last night appeared to be going in Donald Trump's favor, correctly pointing out, of course, the polls getting it completely wrong in Florida. You know, those slight leads that Biden enjoyed in some of the polling, in the average of polling, Donald Trump emphatically winning in that state. There was also a lot of talk about Texas going blue for the first time since 1976. I think the lead there is about 8 points at the end of the day. So the polls really misrepresenting the facts on the ground. And maybe it is about, this secret or silent Trump vote. People that are not certainly don't want to reveal that they're going to vote for the president. Perhaps some people are embarrassed, but really emphatic wins there. But what we are still waiting for is Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Remember that Midwestern blue wall that we keep talking about, the blue wall that Donald Trump dismantled, Francis, in 2016, and that Joe Biden is now trying to resurrect. He's lagging by about 550,000 votes, with about 80% of the votes counted in Pennsylvania. A lot of outstanding mail-in ballot votes that still need to be tabulated, still need to be counted. We're told by the Secretary of State in that state that that's around 1 million votes that are still outstanding. So that could shift, but it's unclear if Joe Biden will be able to make up a 550,000 deficit. In Michigan, he has now taken the lead. And in Wisconsin, it's looking more likely that Joe Biden will prevail. We've just heard from President Trump's campaign manager, Bill Stepien. This is what the statement says, Francis. There have been reports of irregularities in several Wisconsin counties, which raise serious doubts about the validity of the results. The president is well within the threshold to request a recount, and we will immediately do so. So you correctly point out that we're probably not going to get to the end of the road today. We might have a few hours ahead of us, but we might very well have a few days ahead of us in determining who the victor is in this presidential election.
All right, so the legal challenges have already begun, and of course Pennsylvania is an issue. The US president doesn't want the voting to drag on there as well. Let's look at what he said earlier, that the Democrats are trying to steal the vote, steal the election. A lot of outrage about that. And I mean, from a South African perspective, Sherwin, the US is a massive democracy, meant to be this light, as you said, in the world. Presumably, the system is pretty transparent, and a lot of observers are looking in. Just explain it for us.
Transparent to a certain degree, but opaque to an even larger degree, right? I mean, let's just start with the Electoral College, and we've explained and had long discussions about just how convoluted the Electoral College is in terms of, despite winning the Electoral College, despite winning the popular vote, you then have to still go on to win the Electoral College if you are to prevail in winning the White House. The complication with the American system as opposed to the South African system is that South African system is centralized through the Independent Electoral Commission. In the United States, each state has a different rule, and each Secretary of State in each state, right, not to be confused with Mike Pompeo, each state, Arizona, New York, Wisconsin, they have statewide secretaries of state that are in charge of the managing and running of an election, and it is that Secretary of State and their electoral officials statewide that have to then certify the results. So it's a very, very different system. 50 different states, 50 different rules. The electoral rules in Pennsylvania differ in that, in terms of Pennsylvania law, you can receive mail-in ballots 3 days after November 3rd, whereas in a state like Florida, the deadline there is set for November 3rd. No additional ballots will be counted past 7 p.m. when polls close on Election Day in Florida. So you're all citizens of the United States. You all have the same passport, but there are different rules that determine how you vote and your eligibility to cast that ballot in a different state. So this is a very complicated system. And so you're going to see the president challenge very likely the results in Pennsylvania. They are talking about challenging now the results in Wisconsin. And you might see some pushback from the Biden campaign in terms of that. Remember, the sentiment has shifted from last night. The sentiment was certainly very much in favor of Donald Trump winning this election. That was certainly the mood in America. That sentiment has now shifted back as these mail-in ballots come in, Francis, heavily favoring the Democrats in terms of mail-in voting in this election. And so you now see Biden slightly taking the ascendancy, particularly in this Midwestern region that is so critical to any victory in this election. We're also seeing interesting numbers in Georgia. 92% of the precincts are reporting in Georgia, but not all the numbers are in from a place like Atlanta, Georgia, which is the big metropolis, heavily democratically favored there. And so we could see Joe Biden prevail in the southern state of Georgia for the first time since 1992. It's all in play here, but the complication is different rules in different states. So, lawyers will be playing a very big role in the days ahead, no doubt.
As predicted. All right, let's go to one of the blue states. Let me invite two more panelists. Sophie Mokoena, foreign editor here at SABC News, joining us. And we'll come to you shortly, Sophie. But on the ground in San Francisco is Ira Spitzer. California turning blue, so no surprises there.
Well, right. As expected, California was called for Joe Biden basically immediately after the polls closed. With its 55 electoral votes, it is the largest state in the country in terms of population, in terms of the impact on the election. But the fact that it has been reliably Democrat for many decades now means that the outcome was never really in doubt. But despite that, certainly the fact that California is so strongly Democratic meant that it was an extremely dramatic and nerve-wracking night for California voters on both sides of the spectrum, really, of course. And we have seen just tremendous twists and turns over the past 12 hours or so, with the emergence now of new data coming out of Wisconsin and Michigan, and certainly I think California Democrats who overwhelmingly voted for Joe Biden are feeling much more confident given the numbers that we're seeing. Given Joe Biden's confidence, his campaign is insistent that they will win after all the votes are counted, but really a nerve-wracking and an exciting finish here to the election that Californians are watching very closely.
Ira, the blue wave that's been talked about, though, that hasn't materialized. There were hopes that this win would be very comfortable, sort of ending the legislative stalemate that we've seen, because it also depends on who controls the Senate. Is this really disappointing for the Democrats, even if they win?
I think it will be disappointing for the Democrats, even if they are able to retake the presidency. When you look at a state like California, the priorities among many of the voters here are things such as climate change. We've had a devastating wildfire season so far, which many experts believe climate change has made worse. Joe Biden has proposed a $2 trillion plan to address climate change. But if the Democrats are not able to take control of the Senate, then it becomes much harder for Joe Biden to enact these types of priorities if indeed he's able to prevail as these votes are counted. So I think the excitement, of course, among California Democrats, as pretty much Democrats across the country, was for this blue wave, was for a complete repudiation of the Trump era, and we have not seen that based on this extremely close election.
All right, let's bring this back home. Sophie, we know that America has been critical of African leaders who, in the face of what seems to be a very free and fair process, have possibly undermined those processes, not accepted, undermined democracy. What's the reaction here at home and the rest of Africa to Trump's claims of fraud? Biden has described those as incorrect and outrageous.
Well, to those who believe that the United States of America is an example of a good democracy, people were very disappointed this morning when President Trump announced that he is not happy, and also giving an indication of almost declaring himself a winner. And therefore, people are beginning to ask questions whether what is going to happen to African countries or in any other region where you have despots and particularly dictators who don't want to leave power, who want to hang on to power. And therefore people saying that this was not perhaps a good thing to happen in the United States of America. But it speaks to the fact that, as I indicated yesterday, that the political establishment has completely changed around the world. You have a different system. Donald Trump is not a politician, and therefore he is not going to subscribe to the norms and values of a real shrewd politician. He has his own way of dealing with things. But when you look at him later today, very little came out from his social media. I think the party itself did indicate to him that perhaps this is not a right decision, or he is now beginning to cause problems for that country and instability. Secondly, earlier on, the EFF leader Julius Malema was upbeat because he was able to point out that we often point out to the United States of America as an example, and therefore it is not, and therefore he questioned the electoral system in that country. Let's take a listen at what Julius Malema had to say about Donald Trump.
They are a first world. They cannot be speaking about rigging of elections now because they're supposed to be a sophisticated world. They're supposed to have the most sophisticated electoral system which will not allow rigging. So if we, the third world, are still complaining about rigging and the first world is also complaining about rigging, then democracy is in danger because we can't learn from anyone about how to run a successful, free and fair elections.
Yes, you had Julius Malema talking about America being a first world, and therefore they cannot do what people normally say these are issues or these are ways in which we conduct ourselves in the third world. But also you look at the embassies of the United States of America in Africa. Recently there were strong messages from Zimbabwe, the embassy there criticizing the Zimbabwean government. You look at the recently concluded Tanzanian elections, a strong message from the embassy of the United States of America after the opposition in that country complained about the issues of the processes of election. Ivory Coast, the same thing. The embassy, the United States of the embassy of the United States of America, they issued a strong statement against Ivory Coast, and therefore now you are saying to those countries, America is no different.
Well, let's see what the US president has been saying. Sherwin, you've been following his tweets. That's often where he's vocal, if not on a live television. Just tell us what he's saying at the moment.
Look, there's a history as well. Just before I read you his tweets, there's a history to Donald Trump questioning election outcomes, even when he won the Electoral College against Hillary Clinton in 2016. You remember that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes more than him, and he didn't like that. He's also questioned the crowd size at his inauguration compared to the massive crowd size that we saw at Barack Obama's inauguration in 2008. So he wants to be the best, he wants to win, and he will cast aspersions so as to make that case seem real. Donald Trump also appointed a commission that looked specifically at his claims of electoral fraud post the 2016 election. very soon after the appointment of that was headed by a former Republican governor of Kansas State, that election commission had to disband because there was no evidence to present. So this is not the first time we've seen the president try to cast aspersions on crowd size, on electoral victories, and now the devastating blow that might be increasing as the days go by, that he might be a one-term president, Francis. These are the types of tweets he's been sending out to his followers. Last night, this is one that was flagged by Twitter, so they basically took it off, but you have to click on view to see the tweet. Last night, I was leading often solidly in many key states. That's absolutely true. In almost all instances, Democrat-run and controlled. Also true. Then one by one, they started to magically disappear and surprise ballot dumps were counted. Very strange. And the pollsters got it completely and historically wrong. These are not ballot dumps. These are mail-in ballots that are just being processed in the normal way. They always are processed. After the polls close, you count the ballots as they come in. So the president trying to cast aspersions here on an early lead that was then overtaken by Biden as the numbers came in. He also tweeted, Francis, we are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed. So the votes have been cast, but they can be received in certain states based on those states' electoral laws. In Pennsylvania, 3 days after the election. In a place like Michigan, it can be received up till I believe November the 10th. In North Carolina, which is one of the swing states we are still waiting for, ballots can be received in terms of North Carolina electoral law on November 12th. There's no anomaly here. You know, military ballots, for example, are cast around the world, and those often arrive late. And so what you see from the secretaries of state in the various states is certification only happens weeks after the election is concluded, the process is concluded. And it's also important, I think, Francis, to point out that when a state is called, like, you know, when the networks say NBC calls California for Biden, or NBC calls Florida for Trump, these are projections being made by the news media based on their own data analysts and analyses of those states. The certification comes much later, but they tend to track with what the media organizations are saying. So if we were to really want to wait to see what certification said, we would be waiting weeks to get an election outcome in the United States. What the news networks have done is their posture is they have staff that analyze the polls, they analyze the various counties, they know where Democrats vote in large number. They know where Republicans will dominate in certain counties, and so they make a prediction that tends to bear out at the end. So that's where we are today. The news networks have made projections, and right now it's leaning slightly in Joe Biden's favor, Francis.
And I mean, Sherwin, even when we get to the point where the election can be called based on a tipping point, a number of votes where thereafter the election can't change, the outcome can't change, like you say, it could still be contested. But we'll follow all of this. Thank you very much to all the panelists tonight. That was Sherwin Bryce-Peace in New York, and Ira Spitzer on the ground in San Francisco, and here with me in studio, foreign editor Sophie Mokoena.